Welcome to Berkley Behind the Bait. Once again, I'm joined by Dan Spengler from Berkley Labs, and I'm joined by usually the baby shark, but maybe the furry shark now, Shane Lehew, Bassmaster Elite Series Pro, and now for something completely different. Berkley's designing forward-facing optimized baits, which the anglers need, but this is something that I have never seen, and it is the Crudge, and which doesn't seem like it makes sense until you find out it's basically a backwards jerk bait, and that's exactly what Crudge is. Jerk backwards. So other than that being an incredible name, talk to me about the bait, Dan.
Oh man, first I'm super excited to talk about this bait. It's been under wraps for a long time. Literally, we've been told don't tell anybody about it. So they've been out to the field test guys, and they really got their hands on the bait and had some success using forward-facing sonar. But here's the bait right here. For the first time, Berkley Krej. This is right now we have one size, a 100 millimeter bait. As you can see, it has an upturned bill. So, and you'll see it's kind of a familiar body shape right here. It's basically the stunna body. It's got a exaggerated flattened body. So a little bit, unlike the stunna, we really exaggerated the belly of this bait. So the whole key with this bait, and I'll explain the flattened belly part, is that it's an ascending bait. So this bait sinks in the water column. It's got these ballast weights in it, super heavy, so it rolls and shimmies on the fall with a backslide. So as you cast this out and let this bait sink down the water column, the water pressure pushes against the bill. The heavy weights cause it to shimmy on the fall, but it's backsliding because of that water pressure. So you can just cast it out and they will bite it on the fall, or it's got that ascending lip. I'm calling it ascending lip technology. So with that lip, as this bait is falling down, and you can observe this on forward-facing sonar, and say you're going over a cane pile or some other structure, and you know there's fish there, you cast beyond it, you can actually, with the sweep of your rod or twitches of your rod or jerks of your rod, there's several ways you can fish it. This bait will ascend up the water column. It'll actually flash as it does that, and it'll go over those structures that are holding the fish, and the fish will come out and react to the bait. You raise the bait up, let it sink back in their face, and it causes a reaction strike. So lots of different ways to fish this bait. But it really was quite a bit of trial and error to get this thing to be perfect. Again, this is a water column centric bait, meaning that that's what we specifically designed it for, is to be fished in the water column, optimized with forward-facing sonar. It's with those weights inside the bait. It's really a visible bait that you can see on forward-facing. But really, the interesting thing about the bait is, of course, that it ascends up the water column. So that's really kind of what the Crudge does. Now, there's another bit of the puzzle that I want to tell you about, is that if you want to just simply retrieve it slow and fish it like kind of like a spy bait, you can do that. This thing has the craziest roll amplitude of any Berkley hard bait I've ever seen. This thing literally will roll almost so the belly will show on the side. So it's got a huge side flash. We know side flash is a key action that drives a reaction bite from fish. So it's going to be flashing. You'll get a lot of contrast, dark to light, and that's why we have the colors we do with this bait. We actually have a whole suite of natural colors that are going to be perfect for the places that you fish this bait. Whether you fish it in the south, the north, the east, or west coast, we got the colors that are dialed in for those specific fisheries. But yeah, it's a unique bait, and lots of different prototypes. I'll just kind of show you before we have Shane talk about fishing. But the first thing we did is we just, we put a shallow stunna bill on it, and look at the pull point out the nose. Well, this thing, it would just tangle, 3 hooks, longer bait. We actually changed it a lot, optimized it with 2 hooks. Look at this real quick. This is kind of cool. About got hooked, by the way. You can see, look at the bill angle here. Initially, this had a flatter bill angle, and we adjusted the the bill angle upward, so you get that rise and you get a little bit more of that tail swing in the bait as it's rising. So again, you can chuck and wind this thing to the bank or out when you're fishing forward facing sonar and reel it slow and it will catch fish. Or you can fish it like a jerk bait, fish it and sweep it up. What's cool in the tank, we have a 13-foot deep tank, 60 feet long, about 6.5 feet wide. And we would throw this out there and we let it sink to the bottom. And in 3 sweeps, I could get it to the top of the water column. 3 rod sweeps, the top. So it covers a lot of the water column real quick. And, and then, obviously gets to the surface. Now, when in field testing, a lot of the guys told me, hey, when they get that to the water column, the fish kind of think it's going away as it's going to the surface. If it hits surface, boom, that's a triggering reaction strike. So a lot of neat stories. I'm sure Shane has some really cool stuff to talk about. So Shane, what do you have on the Crudge?
Yeah, so it's been a really fun bait to play with. Obviously, first look at the bait, it is something very unique that I had never seen as a fisherman before. You think of it as kind of a jerk bait, which is Crudge backward, or Crudge is jerk backwards, and it's so much different than your traditional jerk bait, because when you're using like a stunner per se, that bait is always wanting to go down, right? And the Crudge with the bill angle and the way the bait moves up, it's something that the fish had never seen. So I took it to a couple local lakes, and obviously it's a forward-facing sonar optimal bait, and I used it over some brush piles and rock piles. And you kind of touched on that. When the bait is going up, those fish think that they're pinning that bait fish. They have something a ceiling to pin it to, as kind of what I would say it is. They have that ceiling, so they're all fish, typically bass, they'll feed up. So when it was coming over that brush pile, and I was just using little short twitches, well, when I started twitching it really fast and getting it to come to the surface, they would crush that bait. The first day I took it out, I went to Lake Norman, which I live right by. We have a lot of spotted bass. I caught 2 doubles that day over brush. It was in September. Probably not the optimal, what you would think would be the time frame for a bait like that, but I caught 30 or 40 fish that day and only fished for like 6 hours. So it was a lot of fun just playing around with new baits. I'm always about getting new baits. That anytime you have an idea, I'm like, yeah, please send me one, because I just like playing with new stuff, and I think this is a bait that's really going to stick. Now, that was the first thing I thought of, was fishing it over structure with forward-facing sonar. But later on, that I had the bait a while, they started getting into some schooling fish and things like that. We got into the time of year where bait fish was getting into the backs of the pockets, and just on the surface in general. And you can actually wind that bait really, really slow, and it's almost like a topwater bait. It sits there and it shimmies on the top with a real slow retrieve. So it looks like a bait fish trying to get away on the surface especially to a schooling fish or something like that. The hybrids absolutely destroyed it, which is kind of like a striper white bass cross. We have a lot of those around here. Spotted bass, largemouth. I've caught everything on it. I actually took the bait, found an offshore school of fish, and I was like, well, I'm gonna see if I can sink it down. These fish were in 25 to 30 foot of water on a break, and I was like, I'm gonna see if I can sink that bait down there and get them to react to that. And lo and behold, I caught them for 30 minutes straight. Now, they were fresh fish, but it's like they had never seen it before. I mean, they were fighting over the bait. It was just so unique. It looks like a dying bait fish too. Like, with the way it falls. If you look at the Berkley spy bait, it's got that shimmy on the fall. Well, so does the Crudge. So I'm really excited to get into this time of year and use it when the shad is actually dying off, because it's not going to be like a jerk bait that just sits still. A shad, we see them all the time here. The water temperatures get really, really cold really fast. You have those really cold overnights, and those shad, they start to die off. Well, the Crudge mimics that perfectly, because it's got that tail down shimmy on the fall, and it's going to mimic a dying bait fish. It's going to mimic a shad on the surface, and it's going to mimic fish, bait fish coming over structure, just because you can you can do so many different things with it. You know, I've caught them straight reeling it. I've caught them on short jerks. I've caught them on, like you said, pulling it really fast because it'll wake really quick, and then you kill it and it actually sinks back to the fish. So the fish really have never seen a bait that actually sinks tail back to them. So I think it surprises them, and they either got to bite it or they got to get out of the way of it. So especially on forward-facing sonar, you know, you get those fish tracking it. Well, your jerk bait, you're always jerking it away from the fish. When you pause the Crudge and give it some slack, it falls back to the fish. So, like I said, they have two things they can do. They either get out of the way of it or they eat it. And a lot of them, just out of reaction, I mean, they're trying to kill it because it's a bait fish coming back to them. They're like, "What the heck?" Most of them eat it. So it's been a ton of fun to play with. I've caught them over some grass, just you know, doing the winding it on top thing, just like a top water, almost like a wake bait. So there's so many. I'm sure I'm gonna find even new ways and new places, you know, to throw it, down to sides of docks. I've caught a ton of fish doing that. So there's so many options with that bait, and it casts so well. It's really heavy. Like I was getting into the schooling fish, and I was having a hard time finding a bait that I could cast far enough because they were always, you know how schooling fish are. They're always just a little bit out of reach. But I needed something finessey because they were feeding on that small thread fin. And I was like, well, I'm gonna try the Crudge. And I mean, I could almost spool a Xenon on 10 and 12 pound line. I mean, I was absolutely ripping that thing like it was out of sight of the live scope, and I had it on 130 feet. So I don't know how. I mean, I was throwing it 150 feet, I guess, which sounds ridiculous, but once people feel the weight and how it's balanced, you can absolutely sling that thing a mile.
It definitely seems like something unique, which in today's world, there are very few things that are unique. How are you fishing it as far as gear? What is your actual setup? What have you found to be the most successful?
I mean, I kind of keep it forward what I throw my stun on, so I'm a 7 foot medium rod, you know, something like the winch. I like a lot for throwing those style baits. Been throwing it on 12-pound fluorocarbon a lot, and even with 12-pound fluorocarbon, you can actually reel it at a pretty decent clip and keep it on the surface if that's something that you want to do. And at 12, you know, like I said, I was fishing it in 30 feet of water, so 12-pound, 100% fluorocarbon, and I was throwing it on the Xenon X, so 6.8 to 1. You know, something in the 6.4 to 1 range. Any gear ratio like that, I think, is perfect. Now, if you want it just for a surface topwater bait, you know, you could go for a 7.3 to 1. But you know, if you want a decent action rod, medium, moderate rod, just for because it's a treble hook bait. I mean, you want it to load up into the fish.
Man, it's an incredible looking bait. It offers something different, and Dan, that's a goal. I would imagine as a bait designer, the goal. You know, Berkley Labs works incredibly hard to make the best baits there is out there, but jackpot is when you have something that they've never seen before.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that was our goal with this, is obviously to make a bait that is truly different and unique to what we're trying to do with the forward-facing optimized angler control. Again, you can control this as the angler, and you can watch the behavior of a fish, independent fish or schools of fish, and you tweak the way you're working this bait, and you can observe that and see what the fish want. And based on their mood, you can change your cadence and elicit the strike response. And that's cool. Shane mentioned all the neat ways to fish it. When I was field testing it, I threw it on bedded fish, and I'd see a bedded fish, and normally I'm fishing in general. I threw it out there and they hit it every time and I caught them. So it's unique. And I think there'll be a lot of different ways to fish it. So, I mean, who would have, you know, bed fishing isn't forward facing, but it's not exclusive to forward facing. So again, if you want to take this and simply chuck and wind it along the docks, that's something that this bait's going to be able to do. There's just going to be, it's a super versatile bait. I think it's going to be a game changer in forward facing, you know, how anglers approach the fish. It gives you the tool to be successful.
Well, it's a great tool that answers a problem anglers are having. And as you said, Shane, a bait that fires back in their face I mean, that is undefeated in the history of bass fishing. Whether it's soft plastic, hard bait, if a fish is looking at a bait and it goes right in its face, it has no choice. Shane, tell me one tournament this year that you think this will be a big player in.
I'm gonna probably Lake Murray. I could also see it at the Texas lakes too in the timber. You know, they're always suspended fish. Somebody always seems to catch them at Fork. I'm not real familiar with Toledo, but one of those two lakes, somebody always catches them in timber on a jerkbait style lure. And I think this is just going to be so much different that, like you said, all those fish see that bait going away from them. Now they're going to see it coming back when you pause it. I think it's going to play in that tournament quite a bit.
Well, kind of sounds like the opposite to me. Forward-facing optimized baits that are actually backwards jerk baits. But the Crudge is definitely something that I want to try.